Welcome to the very best part of my broadcast week. Welcome to the Republican National Convention here in Milwaukee, a convention for all the reasons you already know, unlike any in modern American history. We're going to do something a little bit different. We're not going to have one sustained interview. We're going to have 4 interviews, and we're going to start our conversation with one of the people we bumped into here in Milwaukee, Vivek Ramaswamy. Went to Yale Law School with, among others, J.D. Vance, and we'll start the conversation there. Vivek Ramaswamy, good to see you.
It's good to see you, Major.
You went to school at Yale with J.D. Vance.
I did.
Tell my audience something that they may not know if they do the quick Wikipedia search of J.D. Vance.
He's a sincere person, and he's somebody who actually cares deeply about the country. But our relationship was actually built on healthy debate, actually, believe it or not. We agree on most major policy questions.
What kind of things did you kick around at Yale?
You know, back then, I got to remember it'd be whatever the topic of the day was. I think we actually both took, I think, a class on health law together, if I don't remember incorrectly. And so those would be the kinds of things that would come out of the classroom, lunch table, cafeteria, conversations. We'd watch Bengals games at a local bar. That would be a time to kind of catch up on whatever was on our minds in a bigger way. Our families have become good friends as well because his wife was also our classmate in law school. And my wife went to Yale for undergrad, and she went there for med school and lived in the same, kind of college as his wife did or something like this. So a lot of connections going back a long time. Our kids are about the same age. They've been very gracious, actually. Even Usha would give us children's books of their kids who are a little bit older than ours along the way. And I think they're a kind of family that reflects not the weird distortion of people you see in American politics, who are almost, many of them at least, could be caricatures of real human beings. He's just a real, gentle, good-hearted human being who cares deeply about the country, and I'm really proud of him.
Not to be contentious, because I'm not a Ivy League person, but you can go to an Ivy League school, graduate, and not be a snooty intellectual elitist, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think JD embodies that. But I think that there's also...
But there's a caricature that comes with that, too, sometimes.
Meaning?
In Republican circles, that if you go to an Ivy League, you're an elitist, you're out of touch, you're snooty.
I'm not somebody who does that. Right? You don't get that from me. I generally don't even use the term the elites very much, largely because I just think it's so overbroad and it doesn't really capture what the real dividing lines are. The dividing line that I think we ought to pay more attention to, it's a separate topic, is the managerial class in this country versus the everyday citizen. Whether that managerial class is in the government, whether it's in an HR bureaucracy in a corporation, whether it's the associate deanships and the administrators at a university. You could think about the university setting even. You got faculty who are independent thinkers. Many of them lean left. Put that to one side. It's not my point. They're independent thinkers who have to actually get tenure or at least achieve rewards historically in the old system based on their ideas. Administrators have really taken over universities, the people who aren't originating ideas but who are supposed to manage it. Look at the federal government, the same thing. The people who we elect to run the government aren't the ones making the policy. They're unelected managerial bureaucrats. And so I think we live in this moment
where... Or the managerial class of Norfolk Southern in East Palestine, Ohio.
Sure, or corporate America. You could say the same thing.
Corporate America that did not adhere to safety protocols, and there's a huge disaster there, which J.D. Vance has probably been among the most aggressive advocates on behalf of the people, and tighter regulation of the railroad industry as a result of that.
Yeah, so look, I think we can get into specific examples. Part of what I think is the problem is the regulatory state itself, because it lends itself to capture. So I share an interest with people, I don't care if you're on the left or the right. If you want to get corruption out of American politics, we're on the same team. However, I believe the node of capture, how do private interests capture the government, a lot of that is through the regulatory state itself. So this is where we might have some shades of diversity of thought, which I think is good in the conservative movement, in the America First movement. I think there is a question to grapple with of, do we want to redirect the regulatory state to better purposes, or do we want to actually go in there and dismantle it? And my view is we want to go in there and dismantle it, not because that's more important than looking after American workers and manufacturers, but because that is the best way to actually, in the long run, look after the best interests of American workers and manufacturers. That's a longer discussion, perhaps, for another day.
Right. J.D. Vance has been an advocate of President Biden's Federal Trade Commission chair, Linda Khan, saying we should be more aggressive in antitrust efforts with big tech. Do you agree with that?
So, as I said, JD and I agree on most things. We don't agree on everything. My view is there a problem with big tech and the control they wield in this country? Yes, there is. But it comes mostly from the intersection with the government. So a lot of big tech censorship wasn't big tech censorship. We've now learned that it is government tech censorship, where the government was privately pressuring, as the regulator of those companies, privately pressuring those companies to take down speech that was otherwise constitutionally protected. That's illegal. The government should not be able to use social media companies to
Any
do through the back door.
administration for any set
I
of
don't
purposes.
care. Left wing, right wing, it doesn't matter. You shouldn't be able to use private parties to do through the back door the dirty work you could not accomplish through the front door of the Constitution. So to me, that's the real problem. So as I said, do we have room for diversity of thought and an open exchange of ideas in the Republican Party and the conservative movement and even within the America First movement? Absolutely, and I embrace that. But that doesn't mean that I embrace every one of the policies advanced by other people who I still support holding office.
One of the things I've noticed in the first 2 nights here, one of the bigger lines that gets applause from any speaker is the Democratic Party doesn't even know who a woman is or what a woman is. You said in one of the debates that transgenderism is a mental health disorder. Do you still believe that?
I do believe that gender dysphoria is a mental health disorder. It's always been treated that way for most of medical history, for most of American history. But I also think that here's the point, because I think that the starting point of that question, and I enjoy the conversations with you because we're able to actually have this thoughtfully rather than in a gotcha format. I think that demands a reaction of compassion, not cruelty. So the point of saying it's labeling as a mental health condition is not to say that you're demonizing somebody else. It's to say that somebody else may be in need of a different type of help than the kind they're seeking, especially when you're talking about kids. When a kid says that their gender doesn't match their biological sex, I do think that's indicative of something mentally wrong in that kid. But that means the compassionate thing to do is actually to help them. Affirming that confusion is cruelty, but I think belittling them is also cruelty. So the question is, how do we actually get to the bottom of what many of these kids are struggling through rather than resorting to physical intervention by
How about
way
for
of
adults? Do you have a
surgical
different attitude if it's an adult?
My attitude for adults is this. You're free to live your life how you want without the government standing in your way, and you deserve to be treated with dignity. But that's different from kids. Kids are not the same as adults. Now, on adults, I also believe this. Just because you're free to live your life as you wish to without the government interfering doesn't mean that if you're a man, you should be able to compete in women's sports and collect a trophy for it at the end of it. No. I think that there are hard truths in the way that we operate our country, but not in ways that should limit your own freedoms or your own dignity. And I think that those are going to have to be the nuances that we draw if we're actually to respect our principles.
What influence does the long history in this country of labeling homosexuality a mental health disorder, then reversing that, have in this particular conversation for you? Doesn't that in any way temper your thought process?
Well, the reason it doesn't is this, right? For a long time, and a core tenet of the LGBT movement was that the sex of the person you're attracted to is hardwired on the day you're born, even though there's no such thing as a gay gene. However, let's talk about the question of gender. The same movement now calls on you to say that your own biological sex is totally fluid over the course of your life, even when there is a definitive sex chromosome. So just from the standpoint of hard biological science, for those who are part of the Trust the Science crowd, it's interesting how quiet they are on this one. There are 2 hard chromosomes. There's an X and X chromosome, you're a woman, an X and a Y chromosome, you're a man. Simple biological reality. Now, you could double click on that too and say, okay, well, some people are XXY, some people are XYY, Klinefelter syndrome or Jacobs syndrome, and those are syndromes. And that's great, but that's great to recognize. But that's a small, tiny fraction of the population. That's not what's at issue in the trans movement. So I think it's better off when we're tethered to A, hard facts, B, guided by compassion even as we make policy in the backdrop of those facts. That's what I think is going to make us better as a country, not artificially bending what we see as true. In the name of compassion, I think that's a different kind of cruelty.
Politics. AP poll today says 65% of Democrats don't want President Biden to be the Democratic nominee. Adam Schiff, House of Representatives, currently the Democratic candidate for the United States Senate in California, asked President Biden to step aside. Vivek Ramaswamy, do you believe by August, when Democrats convene in Chicago, President Biden will be the Democratic nominee?
This is my personal opinion. I think he will not be. Unlike many others who say that now, I also said this last year when I was running for U.S. president. I said it from one of the debate stages. Back then it was dismissed as crazy talk. The reality is the debate obviously changed that in a big way. But even more deeply, I think, is the last week. The last week, it changed even more deeply because President Biden had to own the idea that we need to tone down our political rhetoric to avoid the histrionics that lead people to maybe act in bad ways. Yet at the same time, his entire campaign message is that Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy. So that's a fork in the road for Biden. Neither one ends in a promising place. I think the Democrats have not yet had the sense of urgency yet. They wanted this to play out. Let the Republican convention play out. Let the Republican festivities play out. Let the Republican vice presidential nomination play out. Then they have full information, likely for their convention, to make their decision of who their nominee is going to be. So that's what my prediction is. But I don't have a perfect track record of predicting the future.
Of course. Do you
what
think
I do
it'll
think
be
is that
Kamala Harris?
So I think that they have a difficulty in passing over Kamala Harris because of identity politics. She got her job because of her race and gender. Don't take that from me. Take it directly from what Democrats said at the time. Multiple Democratic leaders in the lead up to her nomination as VP said, now is the moment to put a woman of color on the ticket. Their words, not mine. But if you appointed somebody on that basis, it becomes very difficult for them to then pass her over for somebody who doesn't check those same boxes. And I think that that's something that we got to watch out for.
Does it matter after the first 2 days of this convention, what you have seen, the enthusiasm, which is clearly evident here? There's a kind of fervor that I think has been intensified. Anyone would notice that here at the convention after the near tragic event, and for the families involved, tragic events in Butler, Pennsylvania. Do you think it matters who the Democratic nominee is?
I don't think it should matter. If we're doing our jobs right, and I believe we will, and I believe Donald Trump will, I don't think it should matter, and here's why. The Republican Party has the chance to now be the party of national unity. That's a beautiful thing. It's something that nobody expected even 8 years ago. Biden ran on the promise of uniting the country. I think he's failed, or we wouldn't be where we are. But the more we focus, as I see us doing here, on who we are and what we stand for, not just as Republicans, but as Americans, the less relevant it becomes which puppet, if I may call it that, which puppet they put up to carry out their agenda. And the reality is that's going to be good for not just the Republican Party, but good for the country. And I think we have an opportunity to do something of a scale that Ronald Reagan did in the 1980s. It's been a generation since we've had that type of unifying event in an election. I think 2024 could be that year.
What is in the future for Vivek Ramaswamy? Jim Banks said recently that Governor Mike DeWine should appoint you to the vacancy that if the Trump-Vance ticket is elected, will be created in the United States Senate in Ohio? Or would you be more preferably inclined to accept a position in a Trump administration should there be one? What's the future for you?
I'm going to keep an open mind, and I want to assess what maximizes my impact on this country. I'm particularly passionate about shutting down the regulatory state and the administrative state, the fourth branch of government. There's ways to do that through the executive branch. There's ways to do that through the legislative branch, through the Senate, or otherwise. So I want to keep an open mind. I'm grateful for the interest that not only Republicans, but people across this country have had in my future and how I'm going to be able to serve the country. One of the things I've learned in my life is whenever you make your own personal plans, thinking about yourself, it never goes according to plan anyway. But when you're called by your sense of purpose and you know the why, then the plan tends to reveal itself. So that's the way I'm approaching it.
Fair to say it'll be either one, the Senate or an executive position?
I think that those are compelling paths. But again, I'm not in the business of right now taking out a notebook and charting out my own path. I think my life experience has taught me. I'll tell you one thing is I want it to be, whatever it is, I want it to be substantial, whatever comes next. I got a good piece of advice as a young person, and it applied in my prior careers as in this one. It takes about as much effort to do something small and to do it well as it does to do something really big and to do it well. And so we all only have a short time that we're given. We might as well do the big things and the big things that matter. And so that'll be the litmus test that I use is how do I have the biggest impact on this country, and whatever that is, I'm going to do it.
Vivek Ramaswamy, always a pleasure. Thanks. As I mentioned, you're going to hear lots of different voices on this week's show, Republican and Democrat. When we come back for segment 2 of the Takeout from the Republican National Convention right here in Milwaukee, Georgia Republican Governor Brian Kemp.
I'm in the camp of we need to win today. We got to get up and win tomorrow, get up and win the next day. We got to do that all the way to November.
Welcome back to the Takeout from the Republican National Convention here in Milwaukee. Just one quick note, we haven't had a national convention in our country since 2016. And something gets lost when Americans don't see fellow Americans gathering in support of their party, whether it's Republicans or Democrats. But the gathering here, I must tell you, has two different and distinct feels. Celebration but also a sense of gratitude, because what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, the Saturday before this convention rocked everyone here. We sort of began our conversation with Georgia Republican Governor Brian Kemp there. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Great to be on with you.
Tell me about your reflections of not just the first 2 days of this convention, but the 2 days that preceded it, 2 days unlike any in the history of the Republican Party.
Yeah, really of the country for modern day America, modern day political environment, and the modern day really new rally that Donald Trump created when he first ran for office, and to see something like that happen. I mean, to me, my first reaction when I saw that was it was really sad for the country. Obviously traumatic for the loss of life, just from a great father, a everyday hero as a volunteer firefighter, and guy that died a hero protecting his family, those that were injured, those that had been affected by this, and certainly the traumatic event on former President Trump, just really a miracle he's still with us. I can't imagine what the country would be like right now if the opposite had happened on Saturday. But I think, he showed great strength, resolve, commitment. I think it's given everybody a really new American spirit. In some ways on both sides of the aisle. I know it's hard for Democrats to pull for Donald Trump, but I think everybody was pulling for our president or former president in that situation, regardless of whether they were Republican or Democrat, because there's just no place for that in our Republican democracy here in the U.S. And I think that's fed over into the first days of the convention. A lot of energy, but also a lot of grace.
Steve Daines, Montana senator, told me yesterday, just think about this. If in fact that bullet had done what it intended to do, this would not be a convention. It would be a memorial service. It would be a national memorial service. That's the difference between a millimeter or 2 or 3 and the fate of this convention, former President Trump, and the country at large.
Well, he's exactly right. It would be. I'm just thankful it's not. And I think, I believe major Republicans were coming together kind of leading up to the debate in Atlanta, and certainly came together after the debate, after we all saw what happened. And so I had that kind of feeling myself, just as people were starting to solidify around the Republican nominee, our former president. But certainly after Saturday, I think that is absolutely the case. And, just from a political perspective, regardless of all of that, I'm in the camp of Americans can't afford another 4 years of Joe Biden.
Talk to me about the sense I get here from Republicans that everything is rolling Trump's way and this election is effectively over and Republicans are going to sweep the House, sweep the Senate, and reelect Trump.
Yeah, I am not in that camp. I'm in the camp of we need to win today. We got to get up and win tomorrow, get up and win the next day. We got to do that all the way to November. I mean, things.
Don't kid yourself about this momentum.
We cannot take anything for granted. We saw that in the 2022 election when everybody thought we were going to have, big majorities in the Senate, get control back of the Senate, have big majorities in the House, and we ended up, thankfully, won the House, but razor-thin majorities. We don't have control of the Senate. And so if anything should teach us something is we do not need to get overconfident here. The Democrats are in disarray. Joe Biden has a lot of problems, and we as Republicans, and I think former President Trump's done a good job of just, letting that fester, not trying to change the dynamic, being very disciplined. I know Chairman Whiteley in some reporting that I saw is talking about it's a great opportunity for Republicans this week to tell Americans why they should vote for us, what we're for, stay focused on the future, really give that sense of people that America is going to come back. It's going to come back under Republican leadership. So we need to keep doing that, but we cannot just assume that because things have gone good for us for a couple of weeks since the debate, and just the traumatic events of Saturday, that this thing is over. We got to keep working. We got to have the fundamentals of campaigns with door knocking, phone calling, going after non-traditional Republican voters. I thought the party did a great job of focusing on that last night on a lot of issues with a lot of different people to show that we're a big tent party of big ideas, and that we can represent everybody in this country.
What do you think J.D. Vance brings to the ticket? And I want to ask you a couple of other questions about J.D., but just generally.
Well, look, I'm in the camp of, if you're the Republican nominee, especially one that's been president before, you know what you want in a vice president, and I can't really answer that for former President Trump, but as just a politician myself, somebody that's in the executive branch, I would want somebody that I can trust and work with every day, that I can count on, that's going to be loyal and just as a good fit, with the office, with the work we're doing, with my family, and with the people I have to work with in Washington, D.C., and then the House and then the Senate. And I mean, to me, I think J.D. Vance fits that, certainly for President Trump. I've also told a lot of people, too, that I feel like all the people that were rumored to be on the short list and reported about or submitted paperwork, I think would have all been really good picks. And I felt like no matter who he picked, I felt like the Republican base and Republicans in general around the country would rally to that pick. Because at the end of the day, they're going to be voting for Donald Trump or Joe Biden. And I think, all those folks, including J.D. Vance, check the box of something were to happen, he could step into the role of being our commander-in-chief.
I'll get back to J.D. Vance in a second. What's your gut instinct, Governor, about whether Joe Biden, President of the United States, is the Democratic nominee?
Man, I'm like a yo-yo on that. I'm just going up and down. I thought, at one point they were going to go get him. I think now it's really kind of stabilized. So I just don't know. I think it's really going to depend on how he's holding up and how much.
Is that one of those unexpected things you want Republicans to be on alert for, meaning things can change?
Well, that's certainly the case. I mean, if Joe Biden were to slip up again, or if the water would, actually go over the bridge or the cliff, and they made the change, I think it would, no matter who it is, even if it's Vice President Harris or if they get, have some sort of process to get a new nominee, I think that would energize, and especially in this environment, I think would energize the party. I think they would do exactly like Republicans are now, rally to their nominee. And so we have to assume things like that are going to happen. I mean, I hope it doesn't. I think we have our best chance with the way the field is right now. But we have to assume and be ready for things like that. And just, the way you fight through those things is no matter what they do, we can't control what they're doing, right? But we can control what we're doing. We control what we're telling people and why they should vote for us. That's why you have to work on winning every single day.
Georgia went through something in 2020 it had never gone through before. President of the United States did not accept the results of the election in Georgia, which I know you believe were legal, verified, and proper. J.D. Vance has said if he were vice president at that time, he would have entertained and accepted a lot of slates of electors and thrown the race to the House of Representatives. That's not in concert with the Constitution. It would have denied Georgia voters their franchise as communicated by the state of Georgia. Do you support that approach that J.D. Vance has articulated?
I could just tell you that I would fight for our constitutional position. I mean, I took an oath. I put my hand on a Bible that Marty Kemp was holding when I first got sworn in to be governor, and said that I would protect the laws and constitutions of this state, the Constitution of the United States, and that is exactly what I would do. I mean, former President Trump and I obviously didn't agree on everything with the election, but I know in my mind I did the right thing. I followed the law and the Constitution, and I would fight, for the certified results as long as it was a, secure, accessible, and fair election in our state. What they're doing at the congressional level, obviously is out of my control, but I would certainly, that would be my position going into 2024.
One last question. In the after-action reports on 2020, much was made of the poor ground effort of the Trump campaign in Georgia. Are you noticing any differences this time around? Do you think Georgia is winnable and the Trump campaign is doing the kinds of things it did not do in 2020?
Well, Georgia's definitely winnable, but it can definitely be lost as well. I've said that for many months now. When I watched the 2020 campaign, regardless of all the things that happened. And look, there were mechanical issues with the election because of, COVID decisions that were made by the state election board. Legislature and myself never had anything to do with that. We addressed that with the Elections Integrity Act that we passed, and really, helped fix a lot of the problems mechanically that we had that were made because of COVID. And in 2022, we had a great election. But when you look at the 2020 election, what I saw is someone that was going to be on the ballot in a statewide race in 2022. There was not a ground game from the RNC. There was not a ground game for the Georgia Republican Party and the campaigns, both of former President Trump and former Senator Perdue, just did not have the mechanical things that they needed to win in a tight election. And so when I saw that, I said, look, I am going to implement those. I'm going to do those things myself. I am not going to rely on anybody else to do that. We created a leadership committee. We raised $50 million more for the re-elect than we did in 2018 when we first beat Stacey Abrams, and we spent $15 million on our ground game. We did paid phone banking, paid door knocking. We were targeting persuadable, non-traditional votes. We were doing daily tracking, modeling, all the things you need to do. It's just simple blocking and tackling. And every single Republican that ran statewide, we had a libertarian, every single one of us. In every single one of those races, there was, almost a dozen of them. We won every single one of them without a runoff because we had that ground game and we turned those people out. So in a state like Georgia, this is a generic ballot, 52-48, 53-47 state. If you have a good candidate and you have the good mechanics of a campaign, you can win. But if you don't have those things, then all of a sudden it gets razor thin, like we saw in 20. My goal is to make sure that we have another 22 election in 24, not a 20 election. So we're going to spend $1.5 million in legislative races around our state, also helping turn out the base to help the whole ticket, including our presidential nominee in Georgia, to make sure that we keep Georgia red for the second cycle in a row. And that will send a message that 2020 was an anomaly. If we do these things, we can win in the future.
You were organized, but are they organized this time around?
Well, I'm hopeful they are. I know they're doing a lot of things, opening offices. I know they're also, I think, relying on a lot of other groups, whether it be Faith and Freedom, Charlie Kirk's group, whoever the groups are that are out there. Former Senator Loeffler's working on this as well. We are, to make sure we turn out the base. I'm just hopeful, and my advice to them, not they have to take it. They've done a good job running their campaign but they need to make sure that ground game is intact in Georgia and operating, and not just here. They need to be doing that in Arizona, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, all the swing states.
Governor Brian Kemp, great to see you. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Lots of Republicans here in Milwaukee, but also some Democrats. We'll talk to one next on The Takeout.
Who are we going to pick? Who's going to defeat Donald Trump at the end of the day? I'm still riding with Joe Biden.
Welcome back to The Takeout. For those of you who don't know, I'll give you some information about myself. My first convention as a reporter covering it, 1992, the Republican convention in Houston. And every convention I've covered, the opposition party does the same thing. A little bit of soft counter programming. They don't really try to get in the other party's way, but they do a little bit of slight punching back. That's not what's been happening to Democrats this week. They have been in a full-blown conversation, borderline meltdown about the future of President Biden's candidacy. Will he still be the Democratic nominee? And one of the people we talked to about that very topic here in Milwaukee, Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley, who's not only a Biden surrogate, he's a Biden delegate getting ready to go to Chicago. We talked about the convention in Milwaukee, but Biden in particular. Listen up. David Crowley, Milwaukee County Executive, great to see you. Thanks for spending time with us. I appreciate it very much.
Well, absolutely appreciate the opportunity, and I hope you're enjoying Milwaukee.
So give me your 30-second summation of the first couple of days of the Republican National Convention from the perspective of a Democrat and a Biden surrogate.
Absolutely. First and foremost, our community is excited to be hosting the Republican National Convention. We have been working for the past 6 years about how we can shine a brighter spotlight on Milwaukee. We've done that with the DNC in 2020, which was upended because of the pandemic. The following year, we had a great championship run in the NBA with our Milwaukee Bucks, and now we're having the RNC here. And so it's been a great opportunity to showcase not just our neighborhoods, our community, and our people, but all the things that we have to offer no matter what background you absolutely come from. And as a Biden surrogate, I think this is an opportunity for myself to learn about the messaging, learn what's on the ground, what some of the convention goers are saying. But how do we bring that stark contrast, not just to the rest of this country, but as the county executive to our local community at the same time?
I talked to Scott Walker, former governor of Wisconsin, and he said Milwaukee County is one of the most important counties in the future of this statewide election come 2024. How is Biden doing in Milwaukee County?
Well, I think he's doing very well. Everyone knows on both sides of the aisle that if you want to win the road to the White House, you have to go through Wisconsin, which quite frankly means that you have to go through the largest county in the state of Wisconsin right here in Milwaukee. And so while we do have ticket splitters right here in the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County, we know that we still have a story that we have to tell. Talk about the stark contrast the past 4 years compared to the last 8 years. But I truly think that as long as we tell not just the national story, our story right here locally, the investments in affordable housing, in mental health, expanding opioid crisis interventions, those are the things that's going to help us get over the hump in our own community.
David, I want to read to you an AP lead from a story that just posted a couple of hours ago. Quote, as President Biden continues to face the fallout from his debate performance, 7 in 10 adults, including 65% of Democrats, say he should withdraw and allow his party to select a different nominee. Your reaction?
Well, one, Democrats, we are that big tent political party, and we don't always agree. And I do think that sometimes that this type of political discourse can be good for the party. But I do think it's serving as a distraction at this moment. And when I say a distraction, it's not allowing us to actually contrast the policies that we've been fighting for and the results that we've had in the past 3.5 years. And so we can focus on the appearance. We can focus on that 90-minute debate or the gas that the president has had, but we shouldn't allow that to overshadow the great things that has been happening in our entire community. I know a lot of people want to talk about how old the current president is, but let's face it, both candidates are old, right? But we need to be focusing on the future. And so President Biden, he's focusing on ideas and the soul of America, things that will benefit my 3 young girls as we move forward. But the other candidate, he wants to roll back the clock. He wants to go back to a time where we won and fought for freedoms prior to me even being born and going back to that time frame. And so for me, I want us to get back to talking about the policies, talking about the things that my mother, my father would be talking about at the kitchen table about why we need to make sure we get out and vote.
You might also place this in the distraction category. Adam Schiff, a prominent House Democrat from California, Democratic Party nominee for the United States Senate, this day added his voice to other House Democrats who said President Biden should withdraw. That's a big voice. Adam Schiff is not just a backbencher. He is a nominal leader or a voice leader within the party.
Well, I think that everybody deserves to allow their opinions to be heard. And if Adam Schiff wants to say that, the president needs to step aside, the question at the end of the day that we have to ask.
You disagree with him, though.
I do disagree with him.
Tell me
why. But the question, we have done great work in Milwaukee because of the relationship that we have in the White House. When we look at the infrastructure bill that was passed into law with a bipartisan effort, the investments that we're seeing combating reckless driving right here in our own community. When we talk about affordable housing, for the first time in our entire county's history, we're seeing affordable housing in suburban neighborhoods where 5 years ago, prior to President Biden's election, we would have still been talking about NIMBYism. And so for me, let's really get back to the facts. Let's stop focusing on the appearance and turning our politics, quite frankly, into a reality TV show and just focus on the policies at hand.
Any doubt in your mind, David Crowley, that President Biden will be the Democratic nominee when the party convenes in Chicago in August?
As of right now, there's no doubt in my mind. I'm looking forward to being a delegate myself and casting that vote on behalf of both Biden and Harris. But truly, I think that it is our job as Democrats to really focus on the issues and the policies at hand.
And when you talk about affordable housing, because I know that is an issue that is not only important in this county, but across the country, things are different than they would have been had President Biden and Kamala Harris not been elected?
Oh, I absolutely think so. If it wasn't for the American Rescue Plan Act dollars, which gave not just states, but local municipalities the flexibility to make investments, give us the ability to make upstream investments, to be quite frank with you. We have been reacting to many of the issues of the day. And it's about time that we actually start being proactive. And so if it wasn't for this large investment in local units of government, there's no way that we'll be moving Milwaukee County forward the way we have been during my tenure.
There is this conversation about the future of President Biden, and there are some Democrats who've talked to me and said, look, if we get rid of President Biden and we have an open process, it'll be dynamic and exciting, maybe a little chaotic, but it'll be great. Do you have a thought on that?
Well, I don't know any chaos that's great or that brings any dynamic to anything. let's face it, as Democrats, we've seen a chaotic Trump presidency. We've seen a chaotic Republicans in charge throughout not just the country, but right here in our own state legislature. And so while it may bring some excitement, it will continue to serve as a distraction. And so who are we going to pick? Who's going to defeat Donald Trump at the end of the day? I'm still riding with Joe Biden.
In Milwaukee County and the state writ large, what do you think the state of the race is right now? The polls seem to indicate Trump has a slight edge. Agree?
Well, the polls are indicating that he has a slight edge, absolutely. I always wonder who are they actually polling, because I am not receiving any of these phone calls or these emails. But I do think that, a lot of people are just, quite frankly, cynical to politics right now with what we've seen in the past 8 years and even longer, even when you go back to President Obama's tenure. And so I think that we've made a mockery of our politics, and many people, not just within our country, but around the world, are looking at us to see if we're going to put on our big boy pants and actually get back to the stage that we once were as the superpower of the world. And so for me, I truly think that while polls just measure the enthusiasm gap, I don't think that there are a lot of people who may say that they're not voting for Biden. Those folks aren't voting for Trump. I've talked to many people in this community who may be on the fence about Biden. We have some real solid conversations, and many of them I've been able to convince to get off the edge. But all of them have consistently said there's no way they can vote for another Trump presidency.
And to that point, if I hear you correctly, David, outreach is more successful if Democrats stay the course and not jostle things chaotically here in the 11th hour.
I mean, let's go back 4 years. President Biden won this state by 20,000 votes. I don't think that was a conversation just related on policy. That was us turning out voters. And so the Biden campaign, they have about 40 officers across the entire state. The Democratic Party, they've been out working the ground for almost a year now, as well as other organizations that are supporting Democrats. And I know that the Republican Party does have offices in some communities of color, but quite frankly, I haven't seen a Trump office anywhere in the city or within Milwaukee County. And so if he loves this city so much, you have to really show us that. But at the end of the day, his policies, the surrogates, particularly within the Republican Party, they're not speaking to Milwaukee and Wisconsin values. And as long as we turn out the vote, Democrats will win this upcoming November.
Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley, thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Very local look at this convention from the perspective of a Democrat, David Crowley. When we come back, a big picture view of the politics of Wisconsin from someone who knows it well, former Republican Governor Scott Walker.
I'd say we can't stop until 8 p.m. Central Time here in Wisconsin on the day of the election. It is that close.
Welcome back to the Takeout. We turn to Scott Walker, former Republican governor, for some insight in how to win a battleground state like Wisconsin. Scott Walker, great to see you. Do me a favor. Imagine it's November 5th and people are watching CBS and Wisconsin comes up on our graphics. I'm at the board.
Yeah.
And I'm going to walk them through the most important counties to understand the direction of the election.
Yep.
Help me out.
Waukesha, where I live, Ozaukee, and Washington. Now, those are the suburban counties around the Milwaukee County where we're at right now. Those are counties that traditionally go Republican, although not by the margins that Madison, Milwaukee goes Democrat. In 2016, Donald Trump did reasonably well there, typical of a Republican. In 2020, I think largely because of tone, not substance, some of those voters moved away either to Biden or didn't vote top of the ticket. If those voters return to the kind of margins we saw in 2016, Donald Trump wins.
Mathematically, what kind of margins are you looking at in those counties? 55 or above?
Yes,
or 60?
if he's over 55 for
in
sure.
those three counties.
Those three counties are key. Again, typically you get more of a 60-40 or greater margin for Democrats in Milwaukee County. And where the other part of the state should remain solid, but really from 16 to 2020, where to still make it competitive, the north and northwest spot, the parts where old Congressman Dave Obey used to have control of the north, but in 2010 he retired from office and that became really flipped, not only Republican, but very strong Trump territory. That's why that area moved up while the suburbs moved away. it still remained a very, very close state because of that. That will stay, no doubt about it. There's nothing that's going to shake those voters from Trump. It's the suburban voters that will be key to winning.
I talked to Brian Kemp, governor of Georgia. He acknowledged what I'm sure you've heard and what I've heard. All the Republicans here are like, it's over. We're going to win. Everything's at our backs. Everything's breaking Trump's way. Democrats are in disarray. We don't even know if Biden's going to be the nominee. All the momentum, everything. It's over. You would say what, Governor Walker?
I'd say we can't stop until 8 p.m. Central Time here in Wisconsin on the day of the election. It is that close. You know, as you know, I've won 3 statewide elections, and it was a blowout when I got 52, 53% of the vote. Those are huge margins in a contested race here. I think it will be another nail-biter here in the state of Wisconsin. The Biden-Harris campaign has a huge financial advantage going into this convention. They've got massive numbers of campaign offices. They've got paid field staff. There's a bit of catching up that's happening. Certainly the Trump campaign has enthusiasm, as the public polls have shown here in Wisconsin, but there's still a huge financial advantage, and anything can happen. You know, a couple months is an eternity in politics. So people forget, you know the history of this. In 91, the war in Iraq, George Herbert Walker looked invincible, and Bill Clinton came around and said, I feel your pain, less than a year later, and suddenly he was the president.
So invincible that prominent Democrats, much more visible with larger political organizations and much greater access to huge money, opted out of that race.
That's right.
Bill Clinton said, no, I'm taking my shot.
Yep. So
Taking your shot matters in politics.
I just think it's timing. So we can't let up. The advantage I saw before the debate, before all the concerns about Biden's state of mind, was never about that. It was about affordability. We cannot, in fact, any time we spend talking about Joe Biden's personal condition is wasted time, particularly if they move him off the ticket, which I still don't think happened. But it's wasted time, because the real problem, when I talk to voters anywhere in the state, not just in the WOW counties, it's affordability. When we go to Quick Trip, when we go to the gas station, we fill up our tank, it's $1.25 more. When we go to the local grocery store, sometimes it costs us 3 to 4 times what it did just a few years ago. When my kids, my son and daughter-in-law, are building their own first home, it's costing them almost $1,000 more per month in their mortgage payment than it would have when Donald Trump was president. Those are things that no ads, no pundit, nobody else can tell you what you can see with your own eyes. Again, that's part of what helped Bill Clinton. Was he said, I can feel your pain. I know what's going on. It doesn't matter what the polls show.
Doesn't matter where the statistics they roll out.
Doesn't matter GDP.
I was talking to somebody who was
market.
working on the Mitt Romney campaign in 2012, and he said, look, we had every statistic we could roll out. It didn't matter. The emotional reaction to the moment, the feeling of where things are or where they're heading,
yes,
overwhelms statistics, even if the statistics are on your side.
Exactly right. And that's why I can't take any of this for granted. Now, I don't mean that's going to suddenly shift. I think things are heading the right direction. I don't think any voter will, nor should they, if they were undecided, vote for Donald Trump because he got shot last weekend. What I hope some of those people do will give him a chance to at least make his case. There'll be a little bit more interest in what he has to say, and I hope in turn, part of what we'll hear at this convention is Donald Trump not just talking about fighting for them, but talking about the impact of that the other day. I got to think, as a father, but more importantly, as we saw again last night, as a grandfather, that's part of probably what flashed through his mind. It wasn't just standing up, it was standing up and fighting for them and every other child and grandchild like them.
You have pretty good political instincts, pretty good political gut. What's your gut instinct about President Biden? Do you think he remains the Democratic nominee?
I do. I've said for the last year, I thought Joe Biden would gnaw his arm off before he gave it to the president. Now, I say that sarcastically, but I mean that having watched it. When I was a governor, I was part of the leadership team, both parties. I remember going to meet with President Obama. Joe Biden would be there early. He'd stay late. He loved it. I remember watching him as a kid in '87 when he was fiercely involved in that campaign and then backed out because of the plagiarism terms. I think people underestimate his ability to survive. This is a guy who back then should have been off the political map, was totally, thoroughly embarrassed with that, came back, had a distinguished career, even if I didn't agree with his politics in the Senate, runs again, doesn't really have much of a campaign relay, but somehow convinces the Obama team to put him on, resuscitates his national prominence, gets skipped over in 16, makes the case, pushes out Klobuchar and Buttigieg to create that kind of mainstream perceived gate that he needed to get the nomination. and played it right to win in 2020. So don't ever underestimate Joe Biden.
What do you think the damage done of all this Democratic division is? My sense is the most precious commodity in any political campaign is time.
Yep.
Any day wasted, you can never get back.
I thoroughly agree. That's why, to me, part of what I've enjoyed and been impressed with Donald Trump on is while they were imploding the last few weeks before this past weekend, he was largely laying low, letting them do that. You know, when your enemies are got a circular, that's not these days I'm not going to use that analogy, right? When your enemies are fighting amongst themselves, let them fight. Don't get in that mix. Don't be involved in that. And I think that, to me, shows some incredible restraint and wisdom gained by President Trump along the way. Yeah, he's gonna pop back. He's gonna push back, whether it's Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Christine Whitmer, Gavin Newsom, whoever it might be. But that's also why conservatives need to stay focused. Republicans need to stay focused on how the policies dealing with affordability, border security, what it means for fentanyl in communities like this and others across the country, public safety issues, those are the things that matter to voters no matter who the nominee is. If Trump and now Vance stay focused on that, they're on a path to victory.
I have a theory that in 2020, for Republicans on a cultural level, not an economic level, Kenosha meant something to them. Am I right?
100%.
Tell me why.
Well, good example. So, and I'd warned about this. I've dealt with that as governor. I brought the National Guard in. We got control situations like that. They lit it in flame. The governor let it go. The president, in some ways, candidate Biden actually, even the paper in Kenosha, a Democrat typically endorsing paper, said that the Biden and the Democrat governor fanned the flames that led to the problems there. I remember after the federal agents came in that Donald Trump ordered, finally saying, enough is enough, we're going to send help in. There was a maybe late 60s, early 70-year-old black woman from Kenosha on TV that morning being interviewed. And at the end, she was thankful that the president had sent in folks. And at the end, they said, who are you going to vote for? Does this change your vote? There's a long pause. She said, well, I'm not going to answer that. I said to my wife, that woman's voting for Donald Trump. She's just afraid to say it out loud because she just had it with the nonsense. And there's now, for the first time, a mayor and a county executive that are conservatives, that are Republican-backed candidates down in that county. I think in part because people, even in that city, said, that's it. This is out of control. The chaos that Democrats like Biden don't seem willing to stand up against is not protecting us, not protecting our families, not protecting our communities. And that was a huge, huge difference. And I think you've started to see that elsewhere across the country now.
Not just in Wisconsin, but writ large.
Oh, I mean, I just talked to somebody from Bellevue, Washington, talking about how sad things are in Seattle, looking at Portland, looking at Washington, looking at New York City, looking at Chicago, where the convention, once great and still beautiful city. My future daughter-in-law went down to look at wedding dresses there a few months ago. Her mother was afraid to stay there and later in the afternoon into the evening because of all the stories about the crime in the city. Real or perceived, it is a problem, not just for those visiting, but for people living in our largest cities. Last night, when they heard from J.D. Vance, that wasn't just the story of a family dealing with addiction and poverty and crime in a small town in the midst of Kentucky or Ohio. That was the story of similar families here on the north side of Milwaukee who feel like nobody cares about them. J.D. Vance actually enhances that ticket because he personally can relate to that. Donald Trump needs to continue to make the case. He's the guy that's going to fight for them, who've largely been forgotten by all politicians.
Former Wisconsin Republican Governor Scott Walker, thanks so much.
Thank you.
That does it for the Takeout this week from the Republican National Convention right here in Milwaukee. We'll see you again next week.